Why can't we transplant brains? First of all, we should look at what the brain actually does. This thing inside our skulls that weighs on average about 3.3 pounds is larger in humans than any other vertebrate when compared to body weight. That's why we are so brainy. The busy brain is our command center for our nervous system, which takes in data from our body and gives directions to our muscles. In fact, it does so much work, it requires about 20% of our energy to run it. When we are brain dead, we no longer have any neurological activity. With the help of machines, we can be kept alive for a short time, but within a week, the body will not be able to function. While we may still be alive in some sense for that week, we are technically dead when the brain is dead. Some good news is that during the time we are kept alive, some of our other organs can be donated. But why can't we accept someone else's brain? When we transplant something such as a heart, surgeons use a mechanical pump to keep blood flooding through the body while the new heart is being put in. The new heart is then connected to the major blood vessels, and this might take several hours. You'll stay in the hospital for 1 to 2 weeks, and if your body doesn't reject its new heart, it's said 87 out of 100 people make it through the year, and 60 out of 100 get through another decade. So, wouldn't it just be possible to open the skull and connect a new brain where the removed brain was connected? This question was asked to a professor of neurosurgery at Yale in 2013. He actually did say that one day this operation might be successful, but right now we are not even close. The reason is because it's just too darn difficult to connect nerve fibers from the new brain to the native spinal cord. This, he said, is why spinal cord injuries can be so devastating. If we could transplant brains, we would likely not have so many people that are disabled due to spinal injuries. While a written word might have multiple definitions, we can usually determine its intended meaning through context. In speech, however, a word can take on additional layers of meaning. Tone of voice, the relationship between speakers, and expectations of where a conversation will go can imbue even words that seem like filler with vital information. This is where and come in. Or and to toa and oo, ito and ono. Linguists call these filled pauses, which are a kind of hesitation phenomenon, and these seemingly insignificant interruptions are actually quite meaningful in spoken communication. For example, while a silent pause might be interpreted as a sign for others to start speaking, a filled pause can signal that you're not finished yet. Hesitation phenomena can buy time for your speech to catch up with your thoughts, or to fish out the right word for a situation. And they don't just benefit the speaker. A filled pause lets your listeners know an important word is on the way. The colors that we see are a result of the light reflected within a narrow range of wavelengths, what we call the visible spectrum. But sunlight also spans wavelengths that we cannot see. Humans can't see ultraviolet wavelengths, which many other animals can see. But there's one set of wavelengths that elude all of us. These are near-infrared (NIR) wavelengths. And understanding how bird feathers interact with these wavelengths is important, not just for birds, but also for humans through the potential for improvements in thermal efficiency. Our research in the School of Biosciences at the University of Melbourne suggests that some Australian birds can control their temperature and avoid overheating by reflecting near-infrared wavelengths of sunlight. We collected information on 90 species of Australian birds and found a very strong link between living in hot, arid regions and reflecting a higher proportion of near-infrared light. Researchers in the field of animal coloration have largely ignored near-infrared light because it isn't easy to measure and there's no evidence that animals can see these wavelengths. The major currency of our reward system is dopamine, an important chemical or neurotransmitter. There are many dopamine receptors in the forebrain, but they're not evenly distributed. Certain areas contain dense clusters of receptors, and these dopamine hotspots are a part of our reward system. Drugs like alcohol, nicotine, or heroin send dopamine into overdrive, leading some people to constantly seek that high, in other words, to be addicted. Sugar also causes dopamine to be released, though not as violently as drugs. And sugar is rare among dopamine-inducing foods. Broccoli, for example, has no effect, which probably explains why it's so hard to get kids to eat their veggies. Speaking of healthy foods, let's say you're hungry and decide to eat a balanced meal. You do, and dopamine levels spike in the reward system hotspots. But if you eat that same dish many days in a row, dopamine levels will spike less and less, eventually leveling out. That's because when it comes to food, the brain evolved to pay special attention to new or different tastes. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is the main greenhouse gas in climate change. So how does CO2 get into our atmosphere? Well, carbon is part of a cycle. It starts with the sun, which heats the Earth's surface with more energy in 1 hour than the whole world uses in a year. Plants, which are kind of like biological chefs, take that sunlight, and then suck in some CO2 from the air, mix them together, and bam. They create a stored form of energy, in the form of carbohydrates such as glucose and sucrose. The process is called photosynthesis. When animals like us eat those plants, our stomachs convert that food back into energy for our own growth. Greenhouse gases are a byproduct of this process, and are released through waste. If those plants die, they decompose, and tiny microorganisms break down those carbohydrates and again, release greenhouse gases as a byproduct. As you see, energy originates from the sun. It is then transferred as it moves through the food chain. But sometimes, carbon-based organisms like plants or animals get stuck in the earth. When this happens, they're compressed under tons of pressure, and turned into carbon-based fossil fuels like oil, coal, or natural gas. Take a look outside a window. What is the season where you are? How do you know? Most likely, you looked at a tree or plant and noticed details about its leaves, and assessed the qualities of sunlight streaming outside. Observing the timing of biological events in relation to changes in season and climate is called phenology. When you notice the daffodil buds are poking through the snow and think spring is on its way, you're using phenology. When you see leaves turn from green to red, and watch migrating birds fly past, and realize that summer is over, autumn is here, you're using phenology. Literally meaning, the science of appearance, phenology comes from the Greek words pheno, to show or appear, and logos, to study. Humans have relied on phenology since the time of hunters and gatherers. We've watched changes in seasons to know when to plant and harvest food and when to track migrating animals. Scientists observe and document seasonal changes in nature and look for patterns in the timing of seasonal events. Timing of these natural signs has remained consistent until recently. Increasing global temperature is causing rhythms of nature to shift. Bud burst, the day when a tree or plant's leaf or flower buds open, is occurring earlier in the year for some species. For every 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, bud burst happens 5 days earlier than usual. It's rare to find an adult who actively still wonders what their parents think. But that isn't to say that we aren't wondering about our value in more general terms. It's just that we may, without noticing, have taken the question somewhere else, and very often, to particularly harsh modern figures of authority, media and social media. To this pitiless arena, the self-doubting person now directs all their fears of unworthiness and panicked desire for reassurance. To a system set up to reward sadism and malice, they constantly raise their phones and implicitly ask, "Do I deserve to exist? Am okay? Am beautiful or respectable enough?" And, because social media is built on the troubles of the individual soul, the verdict is never a reliable yes. One is never done with cycles of fear and reassurance seeking. Every time their spirits sink, which is often, the self-doubting sufferer picks up their phone and begs to know whether they have permission to go on. If this might be us, we should grow curious about, and jealous of, people who are free. They are so because someone long ago settled the question of what they were worth, and the answer has seemed solid ever since. Social media is a roar in the next valley, not a mob in their own mind. Learning from these calm souls won't just involve deleting a few apps, we will have to go further upstream, back to the baby self, whose alarmed inquiries we must quiet once and for all with ample doses of soothing, until now absent kindness. The result of the scientific research shows that all metals respond to the heat. In recent years, people used to think that metal is supposed to blend under the heat, but sometimes it doesn't behave, so because atoms in the metal have random processes. The heat can accelerate the processes, but won't change the essence of random, so it could violate what we used to think. Hydration heat characteristics of blended cement containing up to 50% steel slag were studied at 25°C, 45°C, and 60°C by isothermal calorimeter. Kinetics equations were used to explore kinetics of blended cement. Kinetics parameters N, K, and Ea were calculated and analyzed. Results indicated that the activity of steel slag was very low. Steel slag accelerated the hydration of aluminates, but decelerated the hydration of silicates in cement clinker. Small amount of steel slag affected little the hydration process of cement. Elevated temperature obviously promoted the hydration of blended cement. The hydration of blended cement containing no more than 35% steel slag was controlled by nucleation of hydrates in acceleration period and by diffusion of ions in decay period. The hydration of blended cement containing 50% steel slag was mostly dominated by phase boundary reaction, then directly by diffusion. Volunteers in scientific studies sometimes get compensated. The payment can be cash, a gift card, or something almost worthless. It's amazing what people will do for a lollipop when they've had a few drinks. Simon Moore is a professor of public health research at Cardiff University in the UK. And the lollipops were for people who agreed to blow into a breathalyzer. While out on a Friday or Saturday night in Wales, more than 1,800 people agreed to the exchange. And the scores covered a wide range of alcohol intake. So that would go from 0 upwards. I think one of the largest scores we had was 120, which is a near-death experience. The researchers also gave a subset of volunteers a short survey about drinking habits and health risks. Questions like, how drunk are you right now, and how extreme has your drinking been tonight? And they found that even very drunk respondents felt relatively more sober if they were surrounded by even drunker people. In other words, our perception of intoxication and its risks is relative. So this is the point: as you change context, perceptions will change, although the absolute level of alcohol in their system doesn't change. A lot of people in the United States are coffee drinkers. Over the last few years, a trend has been developing to introduce premium specially blended coffees known as gourmet coffees into the American market. Boston seems to have been the birthplace of this trend. In fact, major gourmet coffee merchants from other cities like Seattle, San Francisco, came to Boston, where today they are engaged in a kind of coffee war with Boston's merchants. They are all competing for a significant share of the gourmet coffee market. Surprisingly, the competition among these leading gourmet coffee businesses will not hurt any of them. Experts predict that the gourmet coffee market in the United States is growing and will continue to grow to the point that gourmet coffee will soon capture a half of what is now a $1.5 million market and will be an $8 million market by 1999. Studies have shown that coffee drinkers who convert to gourmet coffee seldom go back to the regular brands found in supermarkets. There is no denying that the concept of family has certainly changed in American society over the last few decades. Statistics continue to show that fewer Americans are getting married, and those who do so are having fewer children or none at all. More marriages are ending in divorce. More people are living alone, cohabiting with someone, or marrying more than once in a lifetime and creating stepfamilies. Traditional families once dominated every neighborhood. A traditional family consists of a husband and wife, plus their children, whether biological or adopted. If they have any today, American society displays greater diversity, and many American households can be considered non-traditional under this definition. Family structures that may be considered non-traditional or alternative include single parenthood, cohabitation, same-sex families, and polygamy. Let's take a brief look at each of these. Single parenthood was fairly common prior to the 20th century due to the more frequent deaths of spouses. But at that time, there was a certain stigma surrounding being a single parent. Today, single parenthood is considered more acceptable.